My name is Deborah Morgan. I grew up in a 3-story brownstone where the radiator hissed like a tired pet, and every landlord had a story that started with "back in my day." My father, Harry, ran a tiny antique shop on the corner. He could tell you the year of a ring by the way the light hit it, and he smelled always, faintly of engine oil and Old Spice. Weekends meant pizza at midnight, shows on the couch, and the kind of small, loud happiness that makes a house feel like a home. That life is the fulcrum everything else tilted from. When my parents divorced, the steady rhythms of our small world stuttered. My mother, Maria, who used to hum in the kitchen while she made coffee, remarried faster than I could understand why. Darren Weiss arrived with a smile that fit perfectly in photographs. Tall, polished, the kind of man who knew which wine to order and how to make a joke land at a dinner party. At first, he was a holiday movie come to life. He brought gifts, he listened like he meant it, he praised my dad for being old school good. He told stories about Florida like it was a novel, and we packed up boxes full of a life that smelled of the city and moved toward a sun that promised nothing but warmth. What I didn't know then, what I would only learn in seasons, was how easy it is for charm to be a curtain. Darren pulled the curtain tight. The funny comments turned into rules that arrived dressed up as concern. "Your father says things he doesn't mean," Darren would say, with a hand a little too steady on my mother's arm. "You don't need to worry about him." Maria, who had been the anchor of our small orbit, started calling less, explaining less. She began to nod in ways that suggested she was weighing whether to believe herself. I kept my copies of Harry's postcards tucked under my pillow like contraband. The stakes weren't dramatic in the way a headline makes them dramatic. There were no flashbulbs, no immediate catastrophe, just the slow, ordinary theft of a life. Losing the late-night phone calls with Dad, watching my grandmother's face on FaceTime, wishing I could hug her in person, and realizing it would be awkward because people who love you sometimes get turned into villains by someone who tells better stories. Most dangerous of all was how slowly the new normal settled in. New town, new school, a mother who smiled at Darren as if the past were a movie she'd agreed to forget. If this sounds sentimental, maybe it is. Sentiment tells you what mattered. What was at stake was the small daily ecosystem that made me Deborah. My dad's laugh, the shop bell, the way winter looked from our stoop. What Darren wanted, whether he understood it as wanting or simply as controlling, was the power to rewrite who we were. That's why, even when I started to learn the language of his manipulations, the half-truths, the soft accusations, the way he rewired conversations so he always seemed reasonable, I kept the old life in a shoebox in my head. If you take the everyday away from someone, if you convince them that their memories are mistakes, you can make them into something new. Someone quiet, someone compliant. I wasn't ready to be that person. The arguments started like tiny weather patterns, sudden, unsettling, then terrible storms. At first, they were a slamming of cabinet doors and cold silences that lasted long enough to leave a new kind of ache in the house. Then they graduated to shouting across the kitchen at midnight, to Maria's hands shaking as she tried to explain something that had already been edited by Darren into a different story. He had a talent for making the truth sound like a mistake and making his version sound like common sense. I learned to read his face the way you read the sky. When the smile tightened at the corner, storm coming. There were nights Maria would go upstairs to lie down because of her back, and Darren would tell me very quietly that Harry had been reckless with his anger, that he only came to provoke. It was a neat narrative. Absent father is irresponsible, father with feelings is dangerous, and Darren is the calm center who keeps the household safe. The more he said it, the more pieces of Dad's life were recoded. He told stories at dinner parties that left out the part where Harry held me on his lap and let me choose the radio station. He never missed an opportunity to make me feel like nostalgia was naive. The confrontation that changed everything happened on a rain-soaked Saturday in October. Harry had driven down. He said he wanted to check on us, to see how Maria was adjusting. He arrived with 2 plastic coffee cups and an armful of greasy-smelling takeout from a place he loved. He looked tired in a way real people look tired, the kind of fatigue that doesn't beg for pity, just understanding. I ran to the door because my chest ached at the sight of him, but the kitchen door was closed and muffled words leaked through like steam. I stood by the doorway and listened while voices tangled. Darren's voice was low and precise, like a person cutting glass. Harry's was higher, rawer, the sound of someone trying not to be hurt. Maria was in the middle, sounding like someone being pulled by currents she didn't want to follow. I remember the clatter of a plate. I remember Harry stepping forward because that's what he had always done. Step into the middle when things went sideways. He put his hand on Maria's shoulder to steady her. Darren snapped. It was an ugly minute that moved too fast. Words became shoves. I saw Harry's hand on Maria and Darren's face change. He wasn't the man who smiled in photos anymore. Someone called the police. Someone else stayed frozen. Darren told his version first, calm and precise, that Harry had barged in and assaulted him, that he had been threatened. Harry stammered, trying to explain that he had only tried to protect Maria, that he had never hit Darren. The officer asked questions that felt like traps. Darren's clothes were immaculate. His voice was steady. Harry's hands trembled in a way that looked like guilt. What followed was a courtroom choreography I didn't understand then, but I studied with the hunger of someone watching a magician reveal his best trick. Darren's lawyer asked questions that painted Harry as the angry ex, someone who couldn't let go. Darren produced texts, half-remembered comments, a doctored chronology where he was always the reasonable one. Maria melted under the pressure. She signed statements that read like apologies to a version of herself I did not know. The judge, polite and tired, made a ruling based on what looked like evidence and what felt like plausible danger. The papers said Harry's visits would be supervised. The papers said Deborah would move with her mother. We packed our life into boxes with the efficiency of people who don't yet realize they're losing more than furniture. Harry sat on the stoop of our brownstone and didn't speak. Dad never made big speeches. His silence had always been where the important things lived. I pressed my face to his shoulder as if I could memorize the smell of his jacket. In the car, the city folded away. The way light hits the Hudson, the noise of cabs, the familiarity of the deli on the corner, until there was only a highway and dark trees and the flat, relentless promise of Florida. Moving felt like being transplanted. My school changed names. My friends became faces that receded into the background of postcards. The distance was not only miles, it was a legal clause, a line written by people who met Darren in suits and were persuaded by his control of the narrative. He had rewritten the scenes so often that the version the law endorsed fit neatly into his script. I kept my father's postcards under my pillow like contraband. I hid his voice in voicemail clips and listened to them at night until my throat hurt. The injustice didn't look like a headline, but it felt like the slow theft of everything that made me who I was. It lodged in my chest and bred resentment the way damp corners breed mold. That resentment, small and sharp at first, would harden into the kind of determination that doesn't let people stay small forever. But at that moment, standing in a new kitchen that smelled faintly of citrus and bleach, I only knew the taste of being edited out of my own life and the terrible arithmetic of distance. Every mile between us was a margin Darren intended to write over. For 5 years, our life became a set of small, stingy rules disguised as care. Darren called them precautions and wrapped them in worry. Locked medicine cabinet, limited phone time, no unscheduled visits. Maria, exhausted and anxious, accepted them because worry felt safer than the alternative, admitting she'd been wrong. He learned to speak illness like an argument stopper. "My heart flares," he'd tell a guest, or more quietly to Maria, "I can't handle stress right now." And the room would tilt toward protecting him. When you hear the same sentence enough times, it starts to sound like truth. I learned to measure danger in minor humiliations. At school, I wore plain clothes because flashy outfits were attention-seeking, according to Darren. My social media was a curated museum of harmlessness. Photos of Dad were cropped out or labeled old friend. When I asked about a trip back north for my grandfather Walter's funeral, Walter, who had taught me how to sandpaper a chair until it sang with potential, Darren's face folded into concern, and he told Maria how it would be too much for him. Maria, who had been my fiercest ally once, nodded and said the words people say to comfort each other. Maybe another time. I couldn't fly home. I listened to the funeral on a phone wedged under my pillow, muffled voices and a piano that sounded like it was coming from another planet. I pressed my thumbs until the skin went white and tried to imagine clasping my grandmother's hand. The image broke into fragments. Walter's laugh, a forkful of too sweet pie, the towel he used to wipe his hands after fixing something. Grief became a private file Darren had locked me out of. My resistance was quiet because loud rebellion had consequences. I kept a shoebox of contraband, postcards from Harry, a crinkled ticket stub from the last time we went to the pier, a photograph of Dad with paint on his cheek. I learned subterfuge not because I wanted to be a spy, but because memory is a kind of rebellion. I used the library computer to email Harry, changing a single letter in my name so the filters Darren checked would miss it. I learned to text in phrases that were really codes. The kettle whistles meant, call the landline at noon. Once, when Darren took the car and left the house empty for an hour, I called Harry and we spoke like people who shared a secret language. 3 minutes about nothing, 5 minutes about everything. I would lie in bed afterward and count the repetitions of laughter on his voicemail until sleep arrived. There were small victories that felt enormous. I taught our dog Pepper to come to me on a whistle so I could slip out to the mailbox alone. Pepper became my accomplice in ways that felt absurd and sacred. A paw on my knee while I read Dad's letters. A damp nose when I cried. I learned which grocery runs Darren wouldn't attend and scheduled my phone calls then. I learned the sound of the hollow pause before Maria changed the subject. I learned to say nothing and mean everything. At school, I built armor from grades and quiet competence. Teachers liked me because I was polite and helpful, words that sounded like praise but sometimes felt like exile. I learned to blur myself into the background so I could be invisible and, in being invisible, survive. But invisibility has its own cruelty. It taught Darren to believe he could erase us without consequence. There were days when Maria would look at me and briefly become the woman who baked cookies in the shape of stars. And those moments were like being handed a map. She would fumble with a recipe card, laugh at an old sitcom line, and for a minute the old world slotted into place. Those slivers kept me human. They also made the betrayals sharper, because I could see in her eyes the person Darren slowly replaced. I accumulated these small resistances until they formed an outline of something larger, a will that didn't know its own name yet. People often underestimate what hunger and boredom can make a body do. It takes a very particular stubbornness to hide postcards in a sock drawer and to memorize a father's laugh from a 2-minute voicemail. By then, every saved note, every secret call, every stolen walk with Pepper wasn't petty. It was a ledger of survival. The ledger kept a tally that Darren couldn't see, and for reasons I couldn't fully explain yet, that tally would matter later. Halloween came with its usual theatricality. Fake cobwebs, pumpkins with lopsided smiles, neighbors competing for who could look most like a haunted CVS display. I'd always liked the idea of costumes because they let people pretend to be other things for a night. That year, the irony felt sharp. I was wearing jeans and a thrift store sweater that had a hole in the cuff, fashionably broken, or just broken, I never figured which. And Pepper had a reluctant batwing cape that made him look like an overenthusiastic shadow. I saw Darren on our street before he saw me, a silhouette against the orange porch lights, his gait too careful, like someone walking a tightrope in a suit. He was holding Pepper's leash as if the dog might betray him at any moment. My stomach folded in a way that felt like I was about to fall, and for once, I didn't want to hide from the vertigo. I clipped the leash out of his hand. "What are you doing?" he asked, the voice that used to order wine now a scalpel. "You weren't watching him," I said, and the words came out colder than I'd planned. There was something in me that had been waiting for a small defiance to grow into shape. "You leave him alone with strangers. You think that's protecting anyone?" Darren's smile arrived like a reserve army. "Deborah, calm down. This is ridiculous. I'm walking the dog because Because you wanted control, I said. Because you like saying you're helping. He let out a sound that was almost amusement and almost a warning. You're being dramatic. You always were the dramatist. That word, dramatist, was a coin he loved to flip, as if the drama were an indictment rather than a lifeline. I moved my hand reflexively toward the porch light switch, not to make a point, but because my knuckles hurt from remembering the small humiliations that had piled into something huge. Darren stepped forward so close I could see the tiny scar at his eyebrow, the map of a past temper. "You don't get to talk to my wife like that," he said. "My wife." The word hung there, incredulous. "She's not your wife to command." He laughed then, a short bark that made Pepper flinch. In that laugh was everything I'd been storing for 5 years. The nights I was told not to call home, the funerals I missed, the postcards hidden like contraband. I felt something in my chest shift. Not exactly victory, not yet, but the long caged animal of my resentment uncoiling. Darren put his hand on my forearm. It was possessive in a way I'd learned to dread. "Listen to me," he said. "You need to stop stirring things up. Maria's fragile." The hand tightened. My first reaction was reflex. Pull away, but I held my ground. "You don't get to tell me what I can say to my mother," I snapped. He shoved me then. A shove meant to send a message, not to hurt. I stumbled back into the walkway. Pepper yipped and shoved himself between us like he thought he was a tiny, moral bouncer. People on porches glanced up. The street smelled of burning sugar from someone's caramel apples and the distant smoke of backyard fire pits. Everything smelled too ordinary. I pushed him back. Maybe that was the wrong word. I didn't think. I reacted. I shoved him with whatever weight 5 years of small resistances had given me. He grabbed my arm. The grip was rough, the kind of hand that thought force could rewrite a conversation. He twisted, trying to pin me to the porch rail. His face had gone something like I'd seen in flashes, not the charming veneer, but the raw person underneath, the person who thought the world owed him obedience. "You're slipping," he said low enough that it was almost a whisper. "You should be grateful." That was when Maria came down the steps. I had half expected her to appear like a mirage, to be the tired woman who once made star cookies, not the person who moved with a speed that made my breath catch. She was hair a mess, eyes wider than I'd seen in years. For a moment, she looked like someone waking from a long dream. "Stop it!" she cried. Her voice was something knotted and trembling and raw. Darren's hand tightened on my arm, and I realized he would not stop because the world had taught him force worked. He was bigger, sure, and his fingers were skillful in a way that had long ago practiced the art of pressing people down. Maria moved between us as if she could be a wall. Darren shoved her back without ceremony. She stumbled, then gathered herself. In her hand, I saw it like a shard, was a small handgun. I hadn't known she owned one. She had never mentioned it, never told me she'd learned how to hold a thing that could end someone. Time folded. Darren lunged. He thought he was taking charge, proving a point with his hands. Maria raised the gun with a trembling precision that told me her body had learned how to say yes to its own protection. I don't know the cadence of fear and clarity that lets someone pull a trigger. Memory frames it in twitching parts. The click, the expression on Darren's face as something he'd never truly believed would happen to him did. The way Pepper's ears flattened, the pumpkin lights strobing like a bad heartbeat. The shot was brutal and small and real. Darren fell backward, the world dropping out from under him like a trapdoor. For a second, silence was an animal in the street. Neighbors' conversations stopped mid-laugh. Someone began to scream. Maria was already falling into herself, hands pressed to her mouth, a sound that might have been a sob or a sound made when a person is only half present. Darren was alive. He made a sound, a rough, surprised groan, and hit the pavement hard, blood darkening his shirt where the bullet had torn through. He didn't die. He would not die then. He would, later, unravel in ways that law and punishment would chart, but in that moment, he was the person gasping on the pavement, while the rest of the world tried to make sense of a life that had been led by his rules. Police arrived like musical punctuation. Lights threw blue and red bars over the porch. Someone called for an ambulance. I sat on the steps because my legs wouldn't hold me up any other way. Pepper pressed against my thigh, warm and small and solid, as if he could anchor me to the floor. Maria was taken inside, then outside again, then handcuffed with a trembling that made the metal sing. Her eyes found mine in a way that bypassed language. Terror, apology, relief, something that looked like a gate swinging open for the first time. She mouthed words that were unreadable, and then the world split into procedures. Questions from officers, the steady thrum of an arriving ambulance, neighbors' hushed speculation. That night didn't end neatly. Darren survived the shot. I learned later that legal lines would be drawn and redrawn and argued over. Intent, self-defense, provocation, history. For that moment, all I knew was the taste of copper in my mouth. The way the porch felt too small and too large at once, and the sense that something irrevocable had been set loose. After the shot, the world didn't snap back into anything resembling order. It unraveled into hearings and paperwork and the kind of procedural noise that pretends it's solving things because it has forms and stamps. For a long stretch, my life was two parallel tracks. One where I walked the dog and went to class and tried to keep laundry from becoming a symbolic disaster, and another where the legal system slowly, haltingly told the truth about Darren. At first, the truth came out in fragments. Medical reports, a string of old texts, a neighbor who finally remembered the night Darren had screamed so loudly you could hear it 2 houses down. The arraignment felt like watching a man in a suit turn into someone whose seams had come undone. Darren sat in court with an expression that had been practiced for years. The hurt, the wounded man. But when a woman from his old office stepped up to the witness stand and called him by the name she used for him, Darren the bully, Darren the man who cornered her at the copier, something shifted. Her testimony was clean and blunt. She had photos of bruises she'd once explained away as clumsiness. She spoke slowly, as if harvesting courage from someplace she'd been protecting all these years. Maria's arrest was a grotesque, necessary thing. The police did what police do first: take accounts, cuff wrists, read rights. The headlines, because of course there were headlines, said, "Florida homeowner shoots husband," and then moved on to the next thing. But inside the courthouse, where cameras couldn't always capture the slow erosion of a lie, the pattern of Darren's behavior began to look like a map. Controlling texts, a series of women who had been isolated and then silenced, a careful trail of small violences that had been easy to dismiss until someone opened the shoebox and let everything spill onto the table. The prosecution in Maria's case hinged on intent and history. Was she scared enough to pull the trigger? Was this a calculated act? The defense wanted us to see a wife with a fragile heart. The prosecution wanted us to see the years of a man building a case against anyone who might contradict him. Testimony from Darren's exes, women with names and lives and gray hair and children, cut through his practiced vulnerability. One woman, 7 years his senior, described being told she was too jealous when she asked why he was always checking her phone. Another read a text aloud that Darren had sent after a second date. "If you want to leave, you better not tell anyone." People like us make messes. It was ugly and also, finally, clear. Maria's lawyers argued that her reaction was the culmination of years of terror, that the act could not be separated from the context of sustained abuse. Darren's camp painted her as unstable and violent. The jury, people who are asked to be gods for a few weeks, looked exhausted at the end of the testimony, as if they'd been forced to read a family album that had been doctored, page by page. While the court weighed Maria's fate, other investigations unspooled. The state brought charges against Darren for a pattern of domestic violence. Victims who had been too afraid to speak before now found their way to the DA's office. It's strange how the law sometimes needs a spectacle to notice things. It had taken a gunshot, the collapse of a practiced narrative, for people to walk into offices and report the steady erosion Darren had been practicing for years. Evidence that had been dismissed as moodiness or poor judgment fit together into a picture of control. Voicemails he forced women to delete, bank statements that showed money moved to help people who had been silenced, a motel receipt where he'd threatened someone into staying. The trials were procedural and brutal in equal measure. Darren's charm went sour in court. The polished anecdotes that had once made him look heroic at dinner parties were read back as gaslighting. He tried to plead ignorance, to say he'd never meant to hurt anyone, but the paper trail said otherwise. When the verdict came down, guilty on multiple counts related to domestic abuse and coercion, it felt, in the cold, small way the law allows, like an accounting. He was sentenced to a term that landed him behind bars. In the months after his conviction, we tried to stitch the ordinary parts of life back together. Pepper liked routine. I liked to study anatomy diagrams like they were a kind of map to a more tolerable future. Maria started seeing a therapist, someone who did not come with a practiced smile or a vested interest. She learned how to hold her sentences again, how to say, "I remember," without trailing off. Then came the note and the phone call, both necessarily clinical in the way institutions are clinical about death. Darren died in custody. The autopsy, the internal memos, the way the correctional facility put it in a statement, all of it was awkwardly bureaucratic and strangely muted. There were no clean feelings to announce. There was no triumphant parade. His death was a final privacy that denied anyone the neatness of closure. I did not feel relief alone. I did not feel revenge alone. I felt a complicated tangle of things. A small, private grief for the man I thought he could have been, anger at the years of damage, and a wary, brittle relief that the system had stopped him from reaching anyone else. People wanted a single word to summarize it: justice, karma, tragedy. None of those fit comfortably beside the specifics of the life we'd had. Justice in courtrooms is a particular kind of arithmetic: counts, sentences, appeals, with 100 human things that never show up on paper. The mornings you missed, the way a birthday cake tastes when 2 chairs are empty, the ritual of listening to an old voicemail until the edges of it blur. What I remember most clearly from that time was how small gestures reclaimed themselves. Harry sent me a set of paintbrushes and a note that said, simply, "If you want to fix anything, fix the thing you can touch." Maria took a class on mindfulness, something she and I made a joke of at first, and then didn't. I sat at the foot of the bed and mapped veins in a cadaver lab, learning how bodies look from the inside, the arteries and sutures in a way that felt absurdly like learning to read after a long time without sight. Darren's death did not undo the years he had taken from us. It did, however, end the Inadvertently, strangely, forced certain truths into daylight. People who had been silenced could now speak without the fear that their words would be reframed as hysteria. Maria, finally unbound from the daily choreography Darren demanded, could start the slow, clumsy work of apologizing to herself. I could go home, sometimes, and sit with my father without pretending I wasn't hoarding small comforts like contraband. But the work of undoing his reach was quiet and long. It was in the therapist's waiting room, in the nights I woke up to the phantom pressure of a hand on my arm, in the small, ridiculous victories like laughing at a joke without looking over my shoulder. It was also in the understanding that revenge, even when it arrives in the form of consequences, is rarely the full stop people imagine. Darren's end was a punctuation mark, sharp and final in a way the law makes final, but it didn't write the epilogue to the parts of our lives he'd edited. That epilogue was, and is, my work to write. I live with my father now. The antique shop still smells the same: lemon oil, dust, and history, and Harry moves through it the way a conductor moves through an orchestra: precise, patient, unfazed by small chaos. Some mornings I wake up to the bell over his door and the soft clink of cups. Other mornings the house is quiet enough that I can hear my own breathing and remember how loud it used to be. Those small domestic rhythms are their own kind of medicine. Pepper has gone from a bat-winged menace to a dignified old man who naps with his head on the sofa arm like he's holding court. He still whines at the sound of the shop door, but now he prefers the warm patch of sunlight on the stoop to the dramatic guard dog routines of his youth. Once, while we were sanding a chair, Harry had rescued from a curb. Pepper nosed at a postcard that had fallen under a splintered leg. My hand went to my pocket for the voicemail clip I still sometimes play, the one where Dad laughs so carelessly it feels illegal. I slid the postcard into the drawer instead. It felt like keeping a promise. Maria is in therapy with Dr. Asha Patel. A woman who asks questions like she's turning a stone over to see whether anything alive is underneath. Dr. Patel is practical and warm, the kind of listener who keeps a shelf of tissues and a shelf of strategies. Visits are uneven. Some days, Maria fumbles through sentences, and we both laugh at the awkwardness of a person relearning her own voice. Other days, she breaks down in ways that feel sacred because they are finally honest. She's learning to say, "I remember," without apologizing for the memory. She's learning to make small decisions again, what to cook, whether to drive to the coast for a weekend. It's slow, and that slowness is real progress. School feels like another kind of reclamation. I'm studying medicine. Anatomy labs are my cathedral. There's something clarifying about making sense of what's inside a body. Valves, sutures, the honest mechanics of breath. Learning how wounds heal, what stitches do, and what time does has been oddly literal therapy. I'm not a savior. I'm a person who wants to know how to stop bleeding, how to steady a hand, how to say a sentence in a way that gives someone a moment of calm. Sometimes I imagine Walter building a chair with me, and it makes the sutures less abstract. I spend nights with flashcards and mornings helping Harry alphabetize price tags. Both are acts of repair. The revenge, if you can call it that, wasn't a trophy I polished. It was a moment that scrambled a story and opened a door. Darren's fall from the script he'd written for us didn't magically stitch up the holes he'd made. It simply made it harder for him to keep making them. People want definitions for moments like that. Justice, karma, tragedy. I keep a different definition in my pocket. Punctuation. A full stop doesn't explain the paragraph. It only allows the next sentence to start. For me, the hardest work after the punctuation was learning how to write the sentences that followed. I do still get nights where the past presses its face to my window. I wake up and for a beat, I'm the girl who counts voicemail, laughs until sleep arrives. Or the kid who hides postcards in the sock drawer. Those nights are loud and stubborn, and then somehow dawn will leak in, and Harry will be in the kitchen making coffee, humming a song he always hums, and the day will demand that I be practical. Lab meetings, office hours, grocery lists. Practicality is a mercy. It is also a lesson in humility. Nobody sings about the quiet courage of getting out of bed. That courage looks like scheduling a therapy appointment, or answering a caller at the domestic violence hotline I volunteer with, or sitting with a patient who needs someone to say clearly, "You are seen." There are moments of small justice. A neighbor who used to laugh at Darren's jokes now brings cookies and a whispered apology for not believing earlier. A woman from court sent a message saying she'd gotten a job and was moving into a place of her own. Those small reckonings are slow, messy, human. They aren't the kind of closure you can frame and hang on a wall, but they steady me. One afternoon, Harry and I drove up to New York to visit Walter's grave. The city was shorter in the way memory shortens places. The corner deli had a new neon sign, and the radiator in the church basement still complained the same way it always had. We sat on the bench, and Harry told me a story about Walter teaching him to strip an old table until the grain glowed. I told him about a cadaver lab and the way ligaments look when you study them close. We didn't need to say the obvious things. Our sentences had a rhythm that said what both of us felt, that repair is a long, steady task, and that we had work to do. If there is a moral, it is not shoutable. It is small, almost domestic. Do the little, gritty work, the things that make a life livable. Fix the chair, make the coffee, learn a stitch, answer the phone when someone needs it. That kind of steadiness isn't glamorous. It isn't cinematic. It is, though, stubbornly effective. Harry knows this in his bones. My mother is learning it. I practice it in labs and in the shop, and in the way I hold my voice when I tell my story to someone who needs to hear they are not alone. The last time I stood on our porch at dusk, Pepper at my feet, I thought about how different life would have been if I'd let silence win. I thought about the postcard under the chair, about the voicemail clipped to my pocket, about the long list of small betrayals that could have convinced me that I belonged to someone else's narrative. I thought about how revenge had only been the punctuation, the dramatic pause, and how everything afterward was the writing. So I write. I study. I patch and sand and stitch. I call my father sometimes just to hear him laugh about nothing. Maria sends me recipes that don't collapse under the weight of who she used to be. Pepper snores like a broken engine, and I rub his ears until he sighs. I am not whole. The edges of me are still healing. But I am moving, and movement is a kind of answer. If someone asks me now whether I feel vindicated, I'll tell them something quiet. I feel free of fear. That freedom is not fireworks. It is a clean cup on the counter, an honest sentence, a patient's hand in mine when their breath steadies. It is the ordinary grace of living a life that you refuse to let someone else edit. That, to me, is the closest thing to justice I know. And it is enough.